Hello, and welcome to Chapter 2, Purchasing Management. This week, we are going to highlight some of the major learning objectives for this chapter. Our last chapter, Chapter 1, introduced you to the supply chain management as a field, talked about its history, talking about how it's been changed over the years. But this chapter is going to highlight just how the purchasing affects supply chain. So as you go through the slides, you will see the learning objectives and what you should be able to describe and understand after you get through reading and going through the exercises. As you can see our chapter outline, we're going to talk about a brief history of purchasing terms. We're going to look at the role of supply management in an organization. We're going to look at the purchasing process, the sourcing decisions, and the roles of your supply base, and how many suppliers are used, and your purchasing organization, as well as international purchasing and global sourcing, and procurement for government and nonprofit agencies. So as you can see, this is how this chapter is going to be laid out. When we talk about the brief history of purchasing terms, purchasing again can be defined simply. You're obtaining merchandise and capital equipment, and it's raw materials, your services, your repair and operating maintenance, supplies in exchange for money and its equivalent. And in the purchasing, there's also the profession itself. There are two types. There's your merchants and industrial buyers, and those merchants are such as your wholesalers and your retailers. They primarily purchase for resale purposes. And then we've got the industrial buyers, and their primary task, they purchase the raw materials for conversion purposes. And they also purchase services and capital equipment and maintenance and repair and operating supplies. So as you look at what purchasing really is in the two categories, then you look at supply management. And it is actually being used more and more in place of purchasing to describe the expanded set of responsibilities of the purchasing professionals. So some of the things they do, used to, the traditional purchasing offices, they used to receive requisitions and they issue purchase orders. And that's really no longer adequate, even though I know it still goes on in companies. But this supply management is more of a holistic and it's a comprehensive acquisition strategy. And it has to be that way in order to meet the organization's strategic objectives. And I like how the Institute of Supply Management, ISM, they define supply management as the identification, acquisition, access, positioning, and management of resources an organization needs or potentially needs in the attainment of strategic objectives. And so we can see how purchasing is changing drastically. As we look at the role of supply management organization, you can see what the primary goals of purchasing are and how that purchasing contributes to those objectives. It's all about trying to get the best materials from the most reliable suppliers, having a great relationship, working closely with those suppliers so that quality is good, and also involving the suppliers as well as the purchasing personnel in product design and new development efforts. And it is to make the primary goals is in the role of supply chain supply management is to ensure there's an uninterrupted flow of materials at the lowest total cost and to improve the quality of the finished goods and to maximize customer satisfaction. There's a couple of things. If you look in your textbook on page 41, it talks about how the annual survey of manufacturers, it published this table, and it was conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau. It shows that manufacturers spent more than 50% of each sales dollar, that's shown as your value of shipment, on raw materials, shown as your cost of materials from 1977 to 2006. And those purchases of raw materials actually exceeded the value added through manufacturing, and that's shown as manufacture, and it's accounted for less than 50% of sales. So we see sometimes these aggregate statistics for merchants are not readily available, sometimes until later on. That's why it is very important that you can get this information from the annual reports of publicly traded companies. And we talk about that and why that matters. Well, again, as you can see, it is one of the primary goals of getting that material, of getting that best quality so your customers are happy and they keep buying your materials and your supplies. As we look on the financial significance of supply management, we see the three functions, and it's a profit leverage effect. We have the return on assets and the inventory turnover effect. Page 42 of your text shows a little table called the profit leverage effect. It shows how your gross sales net revenue and your gross profits can calculate into the profits before taxes. So look at that table and you can see a little bit of just kind of an estimation of what a firm does and how much they can reduce their material cost. And we got the inventory effect as well, the turnover. And those, again, it is something that you need to think about, especially in inventory turnover. And sometimes you can find a more effective sourcing strategy, but purchasing can help reduce inventory investment, and it helps improve the firm's inventory turnover. So all three of these are all something that your purchasing department has something to do with, and why they're very, very important. So let's look at the financial profit leverage effect. This, of course, is the table from table 2.2. We see our gross sales subtracted by the cost of goods sold at 50%. We see equals into your gross profit, and then your sales and general administrative fees, and equals your profit before tax, and your change of profit, C, can increase by 10%. So you want to increase your sales by 10%, and you want to decrease costs by 10%. As you can see that, it did do what it was supposed to do because it brought it out at 100%. So that's just a couple of things to think about as you look at and you start thinking about the purchasing process. The return on assets, again, look at table 2-2, or as you look back on it, you can see again your return on the assets effect. And then we're going to kind of get into manual purchasing system. So a lot of companies are using the manual purchasing system. And manual systems, they look different than what might be shown in your book and on this slide. But a good purchasing system, it has to be easy to use. It has to capture the elements of good purchasing. And it's slow and prone to errors, though, due to the control process, and there's duplication of data entries. And so we want to look at the manual requisitions. So when we look at the purchasing process, the very beginning of it, it starts with the MR. And we know a material requisition and purchase requisition. And then we've got the request for a quote as well as a purchase order. As we go on and look at the next screen, we see it shows that flow of the purchasing process. You have your suppliers, you have your purchasing, your storage warehouse, your users requisition, and accounting. You need to follow the errors as it shows where it starts out with a purchase order and where a tree goes into kind of like a tree, and then it circles back at times. So when you look at it, you see the whole flow. Let's go to the next one. And then this shows just a sample of a purchase requisition. If you work in a company in purchasing, your purchase requisitions the paper copies may look similar to this or a little bit different. Each company is different. When we are looking at the request for quotation, it says sometimes if your material is not available in the warehouse, your material requisition is routed to the purchasing department. And if there's no current supplier for the item, the buyer must identify a pool of qualified suppliers, and you need to do a request for quotation, and it's called an RFQ. And then a request for proposal may be issued instead for a complicated and highly technical component part, especially if you have to put something out to bidders. But a lot of companies are going to more and more of supplier development. So if you don't have a lot of suitable suppliers, the firms might have to assist in existing or new suppliers to improve their processing capabilities. And when that happens, you're trying to tell your supplier that you need to step up your game so we can meet what our needs are for our customers. As we look into the purchasing process, we're looking at e-procurement, and that's becoming kind of a new thing in the last 15 to 20 years. And EDI, which is the Electronic Data Exchange, it was developed around the 70s, and it's supposed to improve the purchasing process. But sometimes with internet technology, especially in the 90s, they've now come up with e-procurement systems, and the proponents of e-commerce, they say that the internet-based systems would quickly replace the manual system. But there's been a shakeup, and it's not much as what they thought it was going to be. But as we look at the internet-based electronic procurement system, we can again see it from the stance of the materials user to the purchasing department and buyer to the supplier. And we do see that there are apparent advantages of the e-procurement system. And as we go from the purchase orders down to small value purchase orders, we look at that a lot of processing costs for small value purchases are minimized. So if you have to go to Walmart and buy some printer cartridges or something, for example, a lot of that can be done through like a procurement credit card or corporate purchasing card. Called a P card. You can do just blanket or open-ended purchase orders. You can do blank check purchase orders, petty cash. A lot of companies do that. Here at the college, for example, if I need to purchase something for my office, a supply like ink, I do a purchase order, and a traditional purchase order, and it is charged to my department's code, and of course is signed off by the administrators, and then those items are purchased through a government contract with Office Depot. That's what the college has. So it's kind of interesting. Every company is different. Some small companies just, they have a Walmart card and they go to Walmart or Office Depot and purchase those materials. Now, as we go through and we talk about purchasing, we are now kind of getting the buyers in with the purchasing. We're thinking about the make or buy decision. And of course, outsourcing is very popular, of course, now. Outsourcing, a lot of companies do that. They want to buy materials and components from suppliers. And we're looking at the different types of integration. There's a backward and forward. And the backward, of course, you acquire your sources of supply. The forward, you acquire customers' operations. And it is also the make or buy decision. It is a strategic decision. As you read through here, I want you to focus especially on pages 53 through 55, because it talks about the reasons for buying and outsourcing. It talks about the reasoning for making. Sometimes it makes better sense to buy, and sometimes it makes better sense to make your own. But where it falls in under, you got to realize you need to look at your reasons. You need to list out the different reasons for buying or outsourcing. Say we got your cost, if you have insufficient capacity, lack of expertise, or quality. And there's several reasons why a company makes their own products. Sometimes you just cannot find the right supplier, or that supplier can't meet your needs. Please study the make or buy break-even analysis. As you can see, it's based on your fixed and your variable cost. You can see the annual requirements, and you can see how it is figured out as you go in. It's called your break-even analysis, and it's a very handy tool that can compute the cost effectiveness of sourcing. All your costs involved, they can classify either fixed or variable costs. The fixed costs remain the same within the range of analysis, and then a linear variable cost relationships exist. And then the fixed cost of the make option is higher because of initial capital investments in equipment. And then number 5, the variable cost of the buy option is higher because of supplier profits. As you can see, there's a few other examples of the make or buy break-even analysis. And as we get towards the end of the chapter, we're talking a little bit regarding the supply base and the preferred suppliers. And we want to make sure that each firm, you have your list of suppliers that you use to acquire your materials. And sometimes you might consolidate that volume into one or fewer, and you have a smaller supply base. And then you're going to look at your preferred suppliers. And our preferred suppliers provide information on latest trends, information on the supply market, its capacity, and cost efficiency. Now, the next video will finish up this chapter, and we're going to be looking at supplier selection. And again, when a company, as we switch gears, as a company looks, they have to look at supplier selection. And I will talk about that slide in the next video.